My name is Harper Whitmore. I was 18 years old the night my father handed my entire future to someone who had never once earned it. We lived in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a house that looked cleaner than it ever felt. White cabinets, marble counters, a bowl of lemons on the kitchen island that nobody ever touched. Everything looked perfect from the outside. I had learned early that this family was very good at making ugly things look pretty. That had been my whole childhood, watching people rearrange the truth the way you rearrange furniture, just enough to make a bad room seem livable. That Tuesday evening in June, I came downstairs expecting dinner. I found my father standing by the sink holding a manila folder. His tie was loose. His eyes were doing the thing they always did before bad news, drifting sideways, landing anywhere except on me. I thought the folder was college paperwork. My acceptance letter to NC State had been sitting on the kitchen table for 3 days. Tuition deadlines, housing forms, orientation schedules. Everything I had spent years reaching toward was finally close enough to touch. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I had absolutely no idea I was about to lose everything I had worked for. Welcome to Revenge Tomorrow, where stories don't just entertain, they hit back. Get comfortable because today's story will take you on a journey you won't forget. Before we begin, drop, comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hit that like button. Subscribe and join the family because trust me, you're about to get hooked. The refrigerator hummed behind me. That sound will live in my memory forever. My stepmother, Denise, stood at the far counter pretending to wipe it down even though it was already spotless. She had a talent for looking busy when she was really just watching. My stepbrother Logan leaned against the hallway doorframe. He was 22 years old and had the posture of someone who already knew what was coming and decided it wasn't his problem. My father cleared his throat. He set the folder on the counter instead of the table. Small detail, big signal. He said, "Harper, there's been a change." I remember the exact weight of those words. Not a dramatic announcement. Not an apology leading in. Just a change like the weather had shifted. Kept my voice calm. What kind of change? He exhaled slowly. Denise's cloth moved in careful circles on the marble. Logan studied the floor. My father opened the folder without meeting my eyes and said, "We had to use the fund." I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Not because anything was funny. My brain simply refused to process the sentence as real. The sound came out before I could stop it. Then the silence returned. And in that silence I finally understood my father was completely serious about every single word. "Use it for what?" I asked. Nobody answered right away. The silence was its own kind of answer. Then Denise turned from the counter. She had a way of delivering terrible information with the expression of someone explaining a recipe. Calm, organized, faintly impatient if you didn't follow along. She said, "For family, Harper. We used it for family." Family. That word had justified every sacrifice I was expected to make since Denise and Logan moved in when I was 12. My bedroom shrank so Logan could have more space. My weekends shifted when Logan had problems. Money disappeared when Logan made mistakes. And Logan always made mistakes. The latest had come with handcuffs. 2 weeks earlier he had been arrested after a bar fight involving property damage and a possible assault charge. I had heard the whispers around the house. I had not asked questions because asking questions here usually meant more disappointment than answers. I looked directly at my father. "Grandma's college fund," I said slowly. He nodded once. Quick like ripping off a bandage. "We used it to help Logan." The word help landed wrong inside me. Help was what you did with extra money. Help was not the word you used when you reached into a dead woman's gift and emptied it entirely for someone else's disaster. "How much?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I expected. My father looked at a spot just past my shoulder. "All of it," he said. I sat very still. Something inside me went completely quiet. Not broken. Not screaming. Just still, the way a pond goes still before something heavy drops into it. I had scholarships. I had worked hard for everyone. But they didn't cover everything. My grandmother had started that college fund the year I turned 6. She called it my future box. She showed me the balance on the bank statement when I was little, pointing at the numbers saying, "This belongs to you, baby girl. Every single dollar." She passed away when I was 15. The fund had stayed. My father had promised me more than once it was untouched. Waiting. Now it was completely gone. Logan shifted in the doorway. He muttered, "It wasn't supposed to go this way." I turned and looked at him. He was wearing a gray hoodie. His eyes met mine for 2 seconds before sliding away. 22 years old. My entire educational future sitting in the rubble of his choices. Then Denise said quietly, "Your brother needed it more." Brother. I let that word sit in the air between us. He was not my brother. He was the storm that everyone else rearranged themselves around. I asked my father one last question. "You knew Grandma left that for me?" He nodded slowly. Then he said, "I did what I had to do." I stood up from the chair. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I did not demand further explanation. I had learned young that screaming in this house only gave Denise more material to use against you afterward. I walked upstairs, pulled my navy duffel bag from the closet shelf. I packed 7 days of clothes, my laptop, charger, birth certificate, social security card, and the small envelope of cash I had saved working part-time at the pharmacy. I packed the framed photo of my mother from my nightstand. I left everything else. At 11:42 p.m., I walked back downstairs through the kitchen and out the front door. My father was still standing by the sink. Denise had moved to the couch. Logan had disappeared entirely. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said wait. Nobody said sorry. The front door closed behind me with a soft, quiet click. Not a slam. Just a click. Something about how gentle that sound was made everything more final than any argument ever could have been. I sat on the porch step for 60 seconds, listening to crickets and distant traffic. Then I picked up my bag and started walking into the dark. My friend Tessa lived in a small apartment near campus with 2 roommates I barely knew. I texted her from the sidewalk. She replied in under a minute. "Come now." I showed up at her door at midnight with my duffel bag and dry eyes. Her roommates were still awake. Someone had made pasta. Someone else was arguing about whose turn it was to buy dish soap. Normal, ordinary, wonderfully small problems. I sat on Tessa's couch eating spaghetti at 1 in the morning and watched people bicker about household chores, and felt something strange wash over me. Took a few minutes to name it. Quiet, borrowed, temporary peace. Tessa didn't pepper me with questions. She handed me a blanket and said, "Stay as long as you need." Her roommate Maya brought me water without being asked. Her other roommate Jonah put a comedy show on without making it weird. These were people I barely knew, and they showed me more basic human decency in 2 hours than my own house had in 6 years. I stared at the ceiling long after everyone fell asleep. My mind kept circling back to my grandmother's voice. Her hands. The careful way she used to say, "This is for your future, baby girl." She had meant every single word of it. Someone else had been counting on that. 2 in the morning I finally checked my phone. 32 missed calls. 14 text messages from my father. 6 from Denise. 1 from Logan. Denise's messages used words like dramatic and ungrateful and overreacting. My father's messages kept repeating "we can work this out," as if those words were a key that could unlock a door I had already walked away from. Logan's message was 4 words. "Don't make this worse." I stared at that for a long time. He had stood in that doorway watching my future get handed over. He had not objected. He had not offered another solution. He had leaned against the wall and let it happen. And now he was texting me about making things worse. Then I opened social media. Denise had posted. One of those carefully vague paragraphs people write when they want sympathy without revealing specifics. Something about carrying a heavy heart and being abandoned by someone you gave everything to. She didn't use my name. She didn't need to. Comments were already full of people telling her they were praying for her. Telling her she was strong. telling her that ungrateful children never understood sacrifice until it was too late. She had posted it within hours of me leaving. Image first. That was always Denise. Build the story before anyone else can speak their truth. The next morning Tessa's mother called to check in and somehow ended up talking to me for 20 minutes. She had a voice that felt like a warm, quiet room. She asked practical questions, not nosy ones. Do you have money? Do you have a safe place? Is there a trusted adult in your corner? Then she asked something nobody in my family had asked me in years. What do you need, honey? I almost cried. Not from sadness, from sheer surprise. Because I genuinely did not know the answer. I had spent so many years adjusting around everyone else's needs that I had no practiced response for my own. I told her I had an aunt. My mother's older sister, Aunt Laurel. I had not spoken to her properly in years. My father had quietly let that relationship fade after my mother died when I was 10. I understood now he had probably done that deliberately. Laurel was sharp. She asked difficult questions. She remembered everything. I found her number in an old email chain. My hands were slightly shaky when I dialed. She answered on the third ring. I said, Aunt Laurel, it's Harper. She said, I know your voice. Talk to me. Just like that, something in my chest loosened for the first time since I had walked out that front door. Laurel listened to everything without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then she asked a question that changed every direction this story would take. Did your grandmother's college fund have any legal structure? A trust document. Pause. I always just called it the college fund. I don't know if there was formal paperwork beyond the account. Laurel said she had seen documents years ago when my grandmother originally set the money aside. She remembered specific language about educational use. Restricted funds. A named beneficiary. She said if the money was held in a formal trust, my father could not legally withdraw it for bail or anything unrelated to my education without specific authorization. She used the word fiduciary. I wrote it on the back of a receipt. It meant someone who legally manages money for another person and is required to use it only as intended. If my father had violated those terms, this was not just betrayal. It was potentially illegal. Laurel said she was getting in her car. Charlotte to Raleigh was about 2.5 hours. She told me not to contact my father, not to answer Denise, and not to sign or agree to anything until she arrived. Said okay. She said, I'm coming, Harper. She arrived that evening with a legal pad, sharp eyes, and absolutely no wasted words. Laurel sat at Tessa's kitchen table and opened her legal pad to the first clean page. She asked me for dates, screenshots, any documents I could access, and the name of the institution holding my grandmother's money. I found an old email my father had forwarded me 3 years ago, a statement from a credit union about 20 minutes from our house. Laurel wrote the address down. Then she asked something that seemed odd at first. Has your father asked you to sign anything recently, even something routine? I remembered. About 4 weeks before the kitchen conversation, my father handed me a single sheet at breakfast. He called it updated beneficiary paperwork that needed refreshing every few years. I signed without reading it. He slid it off the table, said thank you, and that was that. Laurel's pen stopped moving. She looked at me carefully. Did he explain what was being updated? I shook my head. She said simply, we're going to the credit union tomorrow morning. Barely slept. By 9 the next morning we sat across from a branch manager in a small office with mountain photographs on the walls. She was cautious at first. Then Laurel said 2 words. Fiduciary misuse. The manager's expression shifted immediately. She excused herself and returned with her supervisor, and the conversation changed direction entirely. The supervisor brought records. Count history. Trust documentation. The original papers my grandmother had filed when I was 6 years old. The language inside was clear. Funds were designated strictly for educational expenses for the named beneficiary. Withdrawal for any other purpose required approval from a secondary trustee or a court order. Neither appeared to exist. Then came the detail that made the room feel much smaller. My signature appeared on a transfer authorization form, a document approving the movement of nearly all remaining funds out of the trust. My signature, dated 6 weeks prior. I stared at the paper. I had signed 1 page of routine paperwork a month ago. This document had 2 pages and referenced a specific transfer amount to an account I had never seen. I studied the signature at the bottom. Looked like mine. The loop of the H. The upward tail of the R. But something was slightly wrong. Too careful. Too controlled, like someone had practiced it many times before putting it on official paper. Laurel leaned over and studied it without touching the page. Then she looked at me. "Did you sign anything authorizing a transfer for Logan's bail?" I said clearly, "No." She nodded once and said, "Then we may be looking at forgery." The words sat between us like something cold and heavy. Someone had copied my name to steal from me legally. That evening my father called. I answered because Laurel was beside me and told me to. His voice was different from his earlier messages. Less like a parent. More like someone watching a wall crack and trying to figure out where to press his hands. He said, "Harper, why did you involve Laurel?" I said, "Because I needed someone on my side." Silence. Then quieter. "You shouldn't have done that." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I made a mistake." Just a soft warning shaped like disappointment. A threat dressed in concern. I recognized the tone. Denise used it constantly. It was the voice people use when they want you to feel that protecting yourself is actually the thing causing damage. Laurel wrote the time and his exact words on her legal pad while I was still on the phone. When I hung up, she looked at her notes and said, "He knows what we found." I asked how she could tell. She said, "An innocent person would have asked what you found. A guilty one already knows." The next morning we met with an attorney Laurel trusted. Then the university financial office. Then Laurel made a phone call I did not fully understand until later, to the county economic crimes unit. She did it calmly, the way someone calls a plumber when they see a pipe burst. Deliberate. Necessary. Already overdue. The detective's name was Marcus Webb. His office smelled like coffee and old paper. He wore a plain blue tie and took notes with a ballpoint pen that clicked whenever he paused to think. He asked me simple, direct questions. Had I authorized the transfer? No. Had I benefited from the withdrawn funds? No. Had I knowingly signed any document moving money out of the trust for bail or any non-educational purpose? No. Did I believe the signature on the authorization form was forged? Yes. He wrote everything down without reacting. He said investigations take time. I should not delete any messages, not discuss the case publicly, and not contact my father about legal specifics. He handed me a business card. I held it carefully like it mattered. Walking back to Laurel's car, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief. Not anger. A quiet awareness that I was not the one who had done anything wrong. 2 days after meeting Detective Webb, my father showed up at Laurel's condo without warning. When his voice came through the intercom, Laurel looked at me and said, "Stay calm. Let me lead." He came upstairs looking like a different person than the man who had once commanded every room he entered. His shirt was wrinkled. The skin under his eyes was dark and heavy. He had the look of someone who had not slept in a week, which made sense, because he had spent that week knowing exactly what was coming and hoping it wouldn't arrive. He asked to speak to me privately. Laurel said no. He sat on the edge of an armchair and started with emotion the way people do when logic is not available. He said Logan was in serious trouble. He said he had panicked. He said family protects family, and at the time it felt like the only option. I listened without speaking. Kept my face still. Then he said the thing that shifted everything from sad to serious. He leaned forward and said, "Harper, if you just tell them the transfer was authorized by you, this all goes away. We put it behind us and move forward together." Laurel straightened in her chair. She said slowly and clearly, "Are you asking her to make a false statement to investigators?" My father went completely still. For 3 full seconds my father did not move. I watched him understand in real time that he had said something in front of a witness that could not be unsaid. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked at Laurel, then at me, then at the window, as if an answer might be waiting outside. He said, "I just meant," Laurel said. "I heard exactly what you meant." He stood slowly and straightened his shirt even though it didn't help. He said this had gone further than he intended. He hoped I would think carefully about consequences for everyone involved. Then he left. The door closed. Laurel picked up her pen and wrote for almost a full minute without stopping. Every word he had said, as close to exact as memory allowed. When she looked up, she said quietly, "That could be considered witness tampering. Possibly obstruction." I sat with those words for a long moment. My father, a man I had loved for most of my childhood. He had not come to apologize. He had come to ask me to lie to a detective. When I would not agree, he had warned me about consequences. That night I cried for the first time since leaving the house. Not for the money. For the version of my father I had believed existed, who had apparently never been fully real to begin with. 6 weeks after I left home, I was working evening shifts at a bookstore 2 miles from campus. I had deferred my enrollment by 1 semester. The university financial office had been as helpful as the circumstances allowed. I was building something small and steady day by day, and the ground under me was beginning to feel real again. Then Logan showed up. He was leaning against a black pickup truck I didn't recognize in the parking lot near the staff exit. It was 20 minutes before closing when I spotted him. Something made me walk forward instead of turning around. He looked thinner than before. Tired in a deep, worn way. He said, "Harper, this has gone too far." I said nothing. Silence makes people fill the space with truth faster than any question can. He glanced at the security camera on the building wall, then lowered his voice. "You think Dad acted alone in all of this?" That caught my attention. I met his eyes. He said Denise had pushed the plan from the beginning. Said she believed I had options and Logan didn't. Said she argued the trust money could be moved quietly because I was young and wouldn't understand the paperwork. Then he said something that made the parking lot feel very far from everything else. The bail wasn't the only reason money moved. There were gambling debts. Then he walked away and did not look back once. I stood in that parking lot for a long time after Logan left. Cars passed. The streetlights buzzed on as the sky darkened around me. Gambling debts. The bail had been the story I was given. Terrible one but contained. A single panic decision. Gambling debts were entirely different. Pattern. Habit. A problem building long before the night my father stood at the kitchen sink and told me the money was gone. It meant the fund might have been drained in quiet pieces over many months. The bail story could have been a cover for something much older and larger. I called Laurel from the parking lot. She listened without sounds of shock. She asked 2 questions. Whose gambling debts? And could it be verified? Logan's debts. My father had apparently been using my trust fund to cover his stepson's losses while telling me the money was untouched. When I reached Tessa's apartment, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote down everything Logan had said while it was still fresh in my memory. Every word I could recall. The next morning Laurel brought the notes to the attorney. The attorney said something I had not heard anyone say yet in this entire process. She said, "I think we need to subpoena the financial records." That afternoon the paperwork was filed. The subpoena took several weeks to process. I filled the waiting time with work shifts and careful patience. I had become, without planning it, a very patient person. Patience felt like the only thing I owned that nobody could take. When the records arrived, Laurel and the attorney sat with them for 2 full hours. Then Laurel called me into the room. The records showed large withdrawals from my trust account beginning almost 14 months before the night my father told me the money was gone. Not one dramatic transfer. Many smaller ones spread across months. Some moved to accounts linked to Logan. Others were wire transfers to online gambling platforms registered under his name. The amounts added together equaled nearly half the total fund, all gone before the bail conversation ever happened. When my father stood at the sink that night and said the money had been used for family, the bail had only been the final step. The larger theft had been ongoing for over a year. Meaning the kitchen scene, the folder, the rehearsed exhale, Denise pretending to wipe the already clean counter, had all been performance. A story built to make a long, deliberate theft look like one panicked night. Laurel set down the records and looked at me. "The prosecutor's office needs to see these today," she said. He nodded. I had stopped being surprised. I was only interested in what came next. When the prosecutor's office received the subpoenaed records alongside Detective Webb's report, the investigation changed shape entirely. It was no longer a private family financial dispute. The documents showed a clear pattern of withdrawals from a restricted trust over more than a year. The forged signature had been sent to a handwriting analysis expert. Prosecutors were now examining potential charges including trust fraud, forgery of a financial document, and misuse of a minor's estate funds. My father had retained an attorney. So had Denise. They had chosen separate lawyers, which told you everything about how much trust remained between them. Logan's situation was still tangled in his original case with new complications growing on top. Laurel told me one evening on her balcony, watching the city lights come on, "They assumed you were an overwhelmed 18-year-old who would be too shaken to fight back." Pause. "They completely miscalculated who you are." Denise understood the narrative was slipping from her control. She had always survived difficult moments by building the story first, and she moved fast. She called relatives I barely knew and told them Laurel was filling my head with bitterness. She visited my father's church and told members that money and lawyers had turned me against the people who raised me. She posted more vague things online about forgiveness being hard when someone chooses destruction over healing. She sent messages to extended family saying I had always been quietly jealous of Logan, that resentment had pushed me to exaggerate everything. I heard all of this secondhand through people uncomfortable enough to pass it along. It bothered me far less than I expected. I had learned something in the months since leaving that house. Gossip travels fast through mouths. Evidence travels through institutions. Institutions move slower, but when they arrive with documents that do not care about feelings or reputation. The university had granted emergency financial aid pending the outcome. My father called me. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to barely a whisper. He said, "You sound exactly like your mother." Then he hung up. I sat on the edge of Tessa's bed in the dark, holding the phone in my lap, and let those words settle somewhere deep inside me. My mother had been calm and steady and impossible to manipulate. She had loved fiercely and forgiven carefully, and never once confused those two things. I had been 10 years old when she died, and I had spent 8 years in a house that slowly tried to sand everything she had given me out of my character. The man who had replaced her memory with Denise's performances was now telling me I sounded like her. I thought about every time in that white cabinet kitchen when I had stayed quiet to keep the peace. I did not cry that night. I thought clearly, carefully, without anger blurring any of it. My mother would not have let this stand. She would have quietly, firmly refused to let people call theft by the name of love. I was not going to let it stand either. Not for revenge. Because truth belongs in the light, not buried under someone else's comfortable story. The hearing was held on a Tuesday in October. Laurel drove me. I wore a navy blazer she had bought me 2 weeks earlier at a department store downtown. She said, "Let the documents speak today. You only need to be present and honest." The room was smaller than I had imagined. My father sat on one side with his attorney. Denise sat separately at the same table with hers. Two people sharing a legal situation they now blamed entirely on each other. My father did not look at me when I entered. Denise looked at me once. Not with the cold confidence she had shown my whole life. With something I had never seen on her face before. Fear. Credit union representatives testified about the account history and the restrictions written into the trust documents. The handwriting expert presented findings, citing specific inconsistencies in pen pressure, letter spacing, and stroke direction between the forged signature and my genuine samples. The original trust documents were then read aloud into the official record. My grandmother's words were in those pages, written in careful legal language but still entirely hers. Every dollar designated, every purpose stated, every protection she had tried to build around my future while she was still alive to do it. I sat straight and listened to her words fill the room. The civil hearing resulted in a settlement order. My father was required to repay the full value of the misused trust funds through asset sales, a second mortgage on the house, and structured withdrawals from his retirement account over a court-set timeline. The criminal side moved more slowly, but it moved. The forgery findings were formally submitted. The recovered email was entered into the permanent record. Prosecutors reviewed both alongside the financial records and Detective Webb's documented account of my father's visit to Laurel's condo, where he had asked me to falsify my statement to investigators. My father ultimately accepted responsibility in a written statement. He named Denise as the architect of the forged transfer and acknowledged that the gambling debt withdrawals had begun long before the bail. He did not fully protect her. Their marriage did not survive the year. Moving trucks appeared outside the house in December. Denise left first. Logan's legal problems continued through the following spring with no clear resolution. I enrolled at NC State the next January, one semester late, with emergency aid restored and restitution working its way toward me through the courts. On my first morning of classes, I sat in a quiet lecture hall and felt the strange, steady weight of something my grandmother had always believed, that what is truly meant for you cannot be permanently stolen, only delayed. I opened my notebook. I wrote the date at the top of the first clean page. And I began.